Chapter 12. Maria and I were frozen, but fortunately Sophia returned at that moment and caught my mother as she fell. Together she and I put her on the bed, and Maria ran to summon another servant to bring damp cloths and perfumes to help her recover. Came to herself in a few minutes, and refusing all offers of help, returned to her own room with her servant supporting her. I slept poorly that night and had a disturbing dream. I dreamt that I had walked into the banquet hall, my hand held by Constantine. Both of us wore golden crowns, and we went to take our seats at the heads of the two tables. Suddenly, a huge bird, green and gold, but with the face of a human, appeared in front of us, blocking our way. It spoke words that I could not comprehend, but which I could tell had an evil import. I turned in horror to Constantine, but instead of my handsome warrior, I saw that I was holding the paw of a monkey. It laughed and jumped up and down in the way of apes, shouting, "The bird speaks truth. You will never sit in that throne," and then let go of my hand and whirled away, jumping and leaping on all the banquet tables, upsetting the wine until it flowed like blood over the tablecloths. All around me people were laughing, mouths wide, mockery on their faces, and they all pointed at me as I turned and turned, trying to escape, finding myself ever more hemmed in by crowds that would not let me flee. I woke up in a sweat, my bedclothes wrapped tight around me. Slowly I unwound them and rose, trying to dispel the evil dream as I made ready for the day. Maria was stirring under her own quilt, and the maids were already laying out our clothes. For me there was a golden brown robe, one of my better items, but not as formal as that purple-trimmed theme that had caused my father displeasure the day before. We dressed slowly, Maria and I, and we ate a light breakfast that Dora brought for us. I had no intention of attending my grandmother in the throne room as she had commanded, but when my father summoned me there before noon, I had no choice but to obey. Sophia gave my hair a hasty dressing and then accompanied me. When she had seen me safely to the door, she gave my hand a quick squeeze and left. Once again I made my approach, and once again I bowed. My heart was pounding and my head spun, I suppose from the after effects of the wine I had drunk the night before. My father bade me rise, and as I did so, I saw that in the throne room next to him sat not my mother, but my grandmother. The surprise must have shown on my face, for my father said, "Your mother is unwell this morning, and your grandmother has agreed to assist me today." I nodded, not wanting to say what I was thinking. I was accustomed to seeing my grandfather at my father's side, but I resented her presence in the seat reserved for the empress. "Come," continued my father, "come sit on this stool by me, and tell me what you have been doing while I have been saving Christendom, little Anna." He gave a self-mocking smile as he said these last words. "She should be veiled," interrupted my grandmother. "There are other men present." Indeed, the usual crowd of counselors surrounded the throne platform. My father sighed and motioned to one of his servants, who nodded and left the room, returning in a moment with a plain black veil. My grandmother rose from her throne and had me turn my back to her and my father as she tied the cords behind my head. As she did so, she leaned forward and whispered in my ear, "Take care how you answer. Our future depends on it." Our future? What had her future to do with it? She was an old woman. It was my future that concerned me. But I could not answer, for she spun me around to face my father again. He smiled reassuringly and motioned to the stool. I sat on it stiffly, wishing the ordeal were over with. "Tell me, princess," he began, "how go your studies?" "Very well, father," I answered. "Just very well? What kind of answer is that? Come, daughter, tell me what you like to study and what you do not." "Indeed, father, there is nothing I do not like to study," I answered. "Of all subjects, I suppose history and astronomy please me the most." "And why is that?" I had never asked myself that question, and did not really know the answer, but my grandmother was growing visibly impatient as I hesitated, so I started speaking, hoping the right words would leave my lips. I suppose... Then I spoke hastily to avert the storm I saw gathering on Anna Delacena's face. "I suppose because nothing can change them," I said. "What is past, and we can never change history. And the stars are unchanging. They dance each night in the heavens, but one who knows their steps can say what dance they will be doing the next night." "But all life is change, little Anna," he said. "Why do you dislike change so much?" Again, I did not quite know how to answer, so I said slowly, "Changes are rarely for the better." I did not explain, and hoped he would move on to a different subject rather than ask me for examples of evil change. I could hardly say that the birth of his son had been an unhappy event for me, that I had wanted things to go on the way they always had. His departures for war were changes that upset everyone, and it was only when he returned and life went back to its normal course that we lived happily in the palace. Fortunately, he did not pursue the matter, but went on. "I understand that you have been learning statecraft with your grandmother," he continued, turning a smile on her. Her thin lips smiled back, but her eyes did not join in as she watched me closely while I nodded agreement. "And do you learn much from her?" he asked. I nodded again, hands clenched in my lap. I kept my eyes on him, but wanted so desperately to run away that it was an effort to keep seated. "She is a good teacher, Anna," he said. "I myself have learned much from her, and I would not ever have become emperor if it had not been for her counsel. That is why even now she is my most trusted adviser." This time my grandmother's eyes gleamed as she smiled, turning to look at my father. He returned her gaze for a moment, then turned back to me. And what did you learn in your lessons with your grandmother? A question I could not answer with a nod. I stumbled through my response, my voice hoarse as though I had a cold. I learned how wars are waged, how palaces are managed, how treaties are made and broken, how alliances are formed to mutual advantage. He held up a hand to stop me. How treaties are made and broken? His voice slightly emphasized the last word. Broken by the other party, my grandmother interrupted smoothly, and how we must react without dishonor when that happens. I stared at her, astonished at the bold-faced lie. She had not just talked with me about what to do when the other side failed to live up to its side of the bargain. She had spent long hours detailing how to break a treaty without appearing to do so. But before I could say anything, my father had gone on to another question. And what have you learned of the history of our family, Anna? He asked. I dragged my thoughts away from my grandmother's lie and forced myself to think. I have learned little of the Comneni, I answered, since it seems we did little of note until my great-uncle Isaac became emperor. Previously we were barons, were we not, and ruled over small holdings that gradually increased through our military might? Indeed so, answered my grandmother. We have much to be proud of, and it is plain to see that the Ducasse blood has not tainted you very deeply. She smiled at me, but instead of feeling proud of the compliment, I suddenly grew enraged at the insult to my mother and to my betrothed. What was there about Ducasse blood that would dishonor me or anyone? And who was she to say we have much to be proud of? She was not a Comnenus, not even half a Comnenus, as I was. One thing grandmother has not told me much about, I continued, as though I had not heard her, and my father leaned forward, obviously relieved that I was finally speaking of my own volition, is the history of her Dalasena family. I turned to my grandmother and was startled at the venom in her eyes, but I made myself go on as though I had not noticed, keeping my face expressionless, as I did when playing chess. Don't let your opponent know that her king is in danger, I reminded myself. There was a Dalasena who married into the Ducasses, was there not, grandfather? Eudocia Dalasena? Was she a close relation of yours? Hardly, she answered, her face turning dark as she glared at me. A distant cousin. And what, I pursued, were the Dalasenas doing while the Comneni were increasing their power and the Ducasses were consolidating their own? My father leaned back and looked at his mother. As she struggled to come up with an answer, he appeared to take pity on her. The Dalasenas are an ancient family, too, he replied. It is through no fault of their own that they were not able to rise to the station that befitted them until they married into it? I asked, my voice reflecting an innocence that I knew my grandmother would recognize as feigned. Fortunately, my father did not know me so well. Indeed, he said, smiling, and they proved themselves worthy of their new station, and aided it well. You say that your grandmother has told you of her assistance to me in attaining the throne. Oh, she told me she did more than that, father, I said in my sweetest voice. I felt myself move across the chessboard until the king was in my sight. She said that she alone was responsible for your attaining the throne. I assure you I was fascinated by the tale. That is not what I said, exclaimed my grandmother. The child has misunderstood me. A weak attempt to escape checkmate, I thought. It would be difficult to misunderstand words like, I did it, grandmother, I said. What are you trying to say? She asked. I saw her king topple and moved in to capture him. Merely that you told me, but I could not finish the game, for my father raised his hand. He was laughing. Enough, ladies. I see that you are two of a kind, he said as we fell silent, glaring at each other. Neither one of you will admit to being wrong, and neither one of you will change your mind. I see, mother, that you will have a struggle to maintain your influence if I fall in battle, and it is Anna, not I, who sits on this throne. I made the sign of the cross to avert the evil omen of his words. My grandmother did not, but regarded me levelly. Yes, she said finally, I will indeed. And after making a low formal bow to my father, she swept from the room without waiting for his permission to withdraw.